Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Samach Dalid. I will already tell you at the beginning that today's going to be a bit of a complicated daf. I highly recommend using the study guide. It will help you in terms of organizing what's going on, and I will try my best to make it as clear as possible. Today is also the fourth anniversary of the beginning of this cycle, January 5th. So very excited to be at this stage because this is our we try to mark every year anniversary, but this is the one that we're already more than halfway, which is very exciting. 3.5 years to go. So mazal tov to all who've been on this path for 4 years. Also for those who started more recently, but it's a very exciting moment to be at. Today's app is sponsored by Lisa Malik and Adi Weiner in honor of the birth of their first grandchild, Israel David, son of Ariel and Sophia. Ozzy was named in memory of Sophia's great-grandmother, Alexina, and Ariel's grandfather, David Malik. Our grandson's name is also a tribute of Israel, Daniel Fasteg, who composed the Ani Mami melody on a train to Treblinka. Today's daf is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in loving memory of her grandson, Ephraim Yachman. He learned daf Yomi daily in the army with Rashi and Tosfot, even in his Namer. Yehi Zechro Baruch. And also Refuah Shlema for Oz Baruch ben Rivka, who was unfortunately injured yesterday in Gaza. Okay, we will get started with the daf. We were in the middle of explaining, we had two approaches to these psukim. If you remember, I put them on the study guide again if you want to look them over. But we're basically talking about the first three psukim in Shemot, Kaf Bet, chapter 22, and then Vav Zayin and Chet. So Vav Zayin and Chet talk about someone who is given something to watch and then steals it for themselves. But the question is, the first pasuk there, and it mentions kefil in two psukim. First, it just talks about if it was stolen from the house. And then it says, and if it was just a false claim, what happens? And but there's two mentions of kefil. One approach is to say the first mention in Pasuk Vav is talking about regular theft that it was really stolen from their house, and the next two psukim are talking about to'en tanak ganav. And therefore, we get from there that kefil is a payment that's not only in animals, which you would have gotten to from Pasuk Gimel, where it talks about the real law of kefil, which says im himatzei timatzei bi'ado gneva. Today we're really going to darshan this pasuk. So we'll start with it now. If himatzei timatzei, which is a double language, which eventually we're going to say must be there to darshan it, but if it is found bi'ado gneva, they find it in the thief's hands, mishor ad chamor ad seh, which sounds like only animals, okay? A bull, a donkey, or a sheep, chayim shnai mishalem, and alive, okay, a live being, you have to pay double. That pasuk seems to imply only double. So comes this approach that we saw yesterday and says the double payment that you pay in other items as well, movable items that have inherent value, is learned from Pasuk Vav, which is if you give your friend kesef kelim lishmor, money or vessels, and it's stolen, if you find the ganav, you pay double, and that's the kefil. But if you hold that Pasuk Vav is not talking about kefil, then how are you going to get from Pasuk Gimel, where it talks only about animals, to the fact that it's everything? So for that, we're going to bring this braita of Chizkiya, which is going to make this stuff very, very complicated. And I'm warning you, it's complicated. What's going to make it very complicated is we're going to read a braita of Chizkiya, which is a little hard to understand. And there's going to be one major problem with it, which I'll already set up at the beginning so that when we get to the difficulty, you'll see where it's coming from. And then they're going to reread the braita differently. Not only are we going to understand it differently, but things that we thought were questions are going to be answers. And things that we thought were answers were going to be questions. And the braita is actually going to leave off with a question, which is really strange. And then the Gemara is going to have to say, well, if it left off with a question, well, what's our answer to that question? And then we're going to try a whole way of understanding that. And then we're going to reject the entire thing and say something much simpler. That's basically the majority of today's daf. So with that background, we'll get started, and I hope that this will be clear. I'll warn you that, or tell you that what I really recommend to you is to at least learn the stuff one more time, because the first time you understand it, it's much more complicated. And as it happens with complicated dapim, if you read them again and again, eventually it sinks in. I always say it's like watching a movie. In the beginning, like there's some movies you have to watch twice because you have to understand the whole beginning. What were they talking about? So unfortunately, this is one of those dapim that you might have to look at again. Okay, let's go. Tana debei Chizkiya. We're at the bottom of Samach Gimel Amud Bet. Okay, so we're going to learn it from Nafkalemi de Tana debei Chizkiya. De Tana debei Chizkiya, Yoma. It says like this: Yomar shor ugneva v'akol bichlal. The pasuk could have just said shor and gneva. This is a question. Okay, why did the pasuk add all these other words? It just could have said, right? Himatzei timatzei biyado hagneva, okay? The stolen item, which is a general word. And then it says shiur. And then from there, it could have built a paradigm to everything else. Now, the big question is going to be, how on earth could you say that? Okay, because first of all, let's just give some background. There's 3 different klal prat type learning. Okay, there's klal and then a prat. Now, if you have a klal, a general word, and a prat, which is actually what we have here, we have gneva, which is anything stolen, and then we have shiur, which is specific. Generally, what you say with a klal prat is because we get specific after the general, it's just that specific, which would then be only shiur. Okay, this is the major problem with this drasha. This is saying if you had gneva and shiur, you could have said everything. Well, that doesn't make any sense because why would you have said everything? You would say only shiur. It would be most specific because klal and prat means only the prat. If you have prat and klal, then the klal is mosif ala prat. And then the klal is coming to say, oh, it's way more than just the specific. That would have been a good one, except that that's not the order here. The order is klal and then prat. It's not prat and then klal. Then there's klal upratu klal. That's going to be a little more because it ends with a generalization, a general word. Then we're going to have more than just the prat. What more? Well, we're going to say whatever's similar to the prat. So that's a background thing you need to know for today's stuff. And then you might remember, we also have riboi, miut, riboi, or right, which is a different type of drasha. It's a different school of thought. Like you either do klal upratu klal, or you do riboi, miut, riboi, which is also klal and riboi. They're basically the same thing. But the riboi, miut, riboi is an approach that includes a lot more things. It's saying it's not just things that are very specifically similar to the detail, but it would include a lot more things. It would be a much more general, inclusive type of way of darshaning. Okay, but anyway, that's just introduction. So the Tana de Chizkiya basically suggests shiur and gneva v'akol b'chlal. It could have just said shiur and gneva and everything would have been included, which again, this is what makes no sense about this braita, and this is why we're going to reject this reading. But right now, let's just assume. He's suggesting, okay, it's hard to, because it doesn't make any sense, it's hard to go on, but let's just assume somehow he thinks that just having gneva and shiur, that would include everything. So ilu kachas, so the Gemara says, and then basically, why does it have all these other words? Something doesn't make sense in this pasuk. To which they answer no, because ilu kacha iti omel, it's not really true. I would have said not everything. What would I have said? Ma prat beforash karev l'gabei mizbeach, af kol karev l'gabei mizbeach. Maybe it would only be things that are like shiur, which is slaughtered on the altar. Ma yesh l'chalavi. So what else would that include? For example, oh, that would include seh, right? Because the seh, a sheep or a lamb, like anyone think from that family, goes on the altar. Which means, and here comes our big answer. That was the beginning of the answer, which is, well, you couldn't just have had shiur and gneva. And then keshehu omer seh, well, then the word seh is totally unnecessary because from shiur, we would have assumed anything that's like shiur. What is anything like shiur? By the way, this already, I'll just tell you, because this is where we're going to go in the end. This can't be a klal prat drasha or a pratu klal drasha, because what are we doing here? Maha prat b'folash. It's doing the exact thing we do when we have a klal pratu klal. Because a klal pratu klal, we say anything that's similar to the prat. If it was just I'm just going to review. If it was a klal and then a prat, it would be only the prat, and then you'd have only shiur. So it's clear that this braita, even though it doesn't say so, is really doing klal pratu klal, and that's in the end what Rava is going to explain this braita as doing. Okay, but again, let's put that aside right now. I just want to make it clear so when we get to the difficulty, you'll follow what's going on. So so right now they're basically going to say, if you just had shiur, you would have said anything on the altar, which means seh would have been unnecessary to say. The fact that seh is mentioned anyway then must be coming to teach you ha-mani makayim gneva l'rabot kol davar. So now that it says gneva, which is a general word, and shiur and seh, shiur already taught you karev l'gabei mizbeach. Seh must be teaching you something new. What is it teaching you? If not, what we're looking for. Anything that's mitaltel and gufo mamon. And there you would have your answer to our question of where do you get kefil applies to everything. But that's not true. Because if that was the case, the pasuk should have stopped here. And here comes question number 2. Yomar shor se ugneva kol b'chlal. Then you could have just ended the pasuk there. Why did you have, again, we're going to get to ultimately, why do you have the word chamor in the pasuk? Why do you have the word chayim in the pasuk? So, ilu kachayiti omer, well, if you had shiur, seh, and gneva, you actually couldn't have gotten to everything. What would you have said? Again, it would have to be what's similar to shor and se. So shor we already have on the altar. So se is adding something additional. What additional could it be adding? Well, ma prat mefurash davar hakadosh bibchora must be adding maybe only animals that the firstborn is sanctified. Av kol davar hakadosh bibchora. Now, what would that be including in addition to shor and se that we already have in? Well, ma yesh lecha lavi, it would include chamor. It would include a donkey. But then we basically go back, and this is the same type of question we had before. Well, if from shor, se, and gneva, you would include anything that's similar to them on the altar and sanctify the firstborn is sanctified, you don't need the word chamor at all. So now the fact that the word chamor is extra, because chamor is also, so it's not karev gebem mizbeach, but its firstborn is sanctified. So so chamor was already in. So what do you need chamor for? So geneva must be geneva, shor, se, chamor. Now the combination of all of those is going to basically include everything. In which case, we have a problem though. Again, this is obvious where we're going because it's the same place we keep going at every section here. Yomar, shor, chamor, se, geneva, v'kol b'chla. So what would chamor include then? Well, chamor would include all animals because we're still in the animal category. We went from animals that are on the altar, animals that have firstborns, even though they don't go on the altar, which included the chamor, which meant the chamor was unnecessary. It must be coming to teach all animals. But wait, only all animals. How are we going? And then if it's all animals, now you get to, but wait, now this is our answer. This is saying, Ma yesh lecha lavi shar ba'alei chayim. Well, then you don't need the word chayim because we've already included all animals. So, keshehu omer chayim, we're getting finally to the end of the braita. What do we want to say here? We're trying to get to how do you know kefil applies to everything? Well, okay, before I read inside, shor added animals that are on the altar. Se added animals whose firstborns are sanctified. Chamor added all animals. What is chayim going to add if not what we're looking for? So now that you have gneva plus shor plus se plus chamor plus chayim, it must be everything's included. And that's the braita. And the braita sounds good, okay? We basically kept each word added something new. And with that, we got to the whole picture. But there's a main problem with the whole beginning of the braita and the whole premise of the braita, which is, as I mentioned already, and this is why I said this before, Amar Yomar shor u'gneva. So now we're just going back to the first words of the braita. It suggested you could have just said shor and gneva. Here we're going to get into the klal prat and prat klal and all those things that I mentioned before. That sentence is problematic because miktiv shor u'gneva. It doesn't say in the pasuk first shor and then gneva, which would be a prat and then a klal, and then the klal would come to include other things. The pasuk says gneva v'shor hu dichtiv. The pasuk starts with gneva and goes to shor. Now that's a klal and prat. If it's a klal and prat, well then all you have is shor, basically, right? You wouldn't have any of this. And v'chi tema, ilu ne'emar ka'amal, meaning ilu ne'emal shor u'gneva. Maybe what the braita is saying is not since it said shor, and what do we understand the question of the braita as? If it only said shor v'gneva, we would have thought everything. Maybe it's saying if it had said shor and gneva in that order, it didn't. But had it done that, meaning there was an easier solution for the pasuk, it didn't need to say all those things, could have saved words and switched the order, and then we would have included everything. Now, this is introduced with a chitema. A chitema is going to be rejected immediately. So they're going to possibly suggest that this is maybe what the braita means, but they're going to reject it and then be back to what on earth is this braita talking about? Because if it's really a klal prat, it would really only include a shor. So something doesn't make sense here at all. So anyway, they say maybe what it meant is ilu ne'amar shor gneva, but you can't say that. Now, what's the issue here? The issue is we have a braita and we have words in the braita and things have to fit in with the words. Now, if the first line was, if it had switched the order and it had done a prat and klal, which then would have included everything, well, then the next line makes no sense. Because what is the next line? The next line says, what's the answer to why shor and gneva wouldn't have been enough? Because it said in the braita, if you only had shor and gneva, what would you have said? You would have said this was a Again, this really only makes sense if you say it's a klal, prat, klal, and then it would include anything that's similar to the shiur. Now, mimatzit amrat maha prat mefurash, you couldn't say then, if it had said shiur, now, if it had said shiur and gneva, and it meant prat and then klal, well, then you wouldn't be limiting it. It would be including tons of things. And you wouldn't then say, no, because if it had just, and remember, this is taking the words of the braita. The braita said, no, because if you had done that, you would have only included things that go on the altar. Now, if it was a prat and klal, it would have included way more than that. So it can't be that the braita said, maybe what it's saying is, if it had switched the order, and then we would have included everything, because the answer doesn't match the question. Okay, so that's the next line. This is the hard part to get, but they're saying it couldn't possibly, mimatzit amra means it couldn't possibly have said the next line of the braita as a response, because the response was no, because ma prat b'forash, meaning have a shiur prat, and gneva was a klal, prat uklal naseh klal hamosif ala prat idrabu l'kol mile. No, if you really had shiur and then kamma and then gneva, which was the general word, it would have included everything, and then the braita makes no sense, because the braita said, what do you mean? If you had shiur and gneva, it would have only included things similar to the shiur. So this logic doesn't work. Ela kidichtiv kamar. So now they're just restating the question. But what they really meant to say, even though they said it in the order of shiur and gneva, they really meant you could have just written gneva in the pasuk and shiur and not the rest of the words, and not that they were talking about switching the order. And now we're back to the question. So the question is, and this was all just a possible attempt to answer the question, but it didn't work. Here comes the question again. Gneva v'shor mimatzit amrat hakol bichlal. In other words, if you had gneva and shiur, you couldn't have said hakol bichlal. Why? Because ma haprat meforash havale gneva klal u'shor prat. Klal u'prat ein bichlal elamasha b'prat. Shiur ein midiachrini lo. According to the simple reading of the braita, it makes no sense, basically, what they're saying is. Because the braita is basically setting up a suggestion that it could have said gneva, which is a klal, and shiur, which is a prat. And then that would have taught everything. Okay, let's say they want to suggest that, which doesn't make too much sense to suggest it. But even if it does mean that's what they suggested, the Gemara then the braita rejects it and says, no, because then that would have included anything similar to shiur. But that's not true. If it was a klal and prat, it would have included only shiur, because a klal and prat works, it's the most limiting. It's saying, forget the klal. It's just shiur, okay? If it starts off with some general term and then gets specific, it means only that specific thing. And it wouldn't even include items that are sacrificed on the altar. So that line in the braita makes absolutely no sense, which causes Rava, and this is why I told you in the beginning, Rava is going to turn this whole thing into a klal prat klal. And the reason is because the way the braita treats this type of drasha is the kind of drasha that includes anything similar to it, right? We're going to basically categorize what is shiur categorized, what is sek categorized, what is kamor categorized, right? That's what we basically said. What typifies this that could have learned other things from it. And that's a klal prat klal drasha. Now, how are they going to get to a klal prat klal drasha? It only mentioned gneva and shiur. Where's the klal at the end? So he's going to say there's something just missing in the braita. And it should have said like this. Amar Rava, Tana achayim kasamichle. They were also talking about the word chayim in the pasuk. Now, the word chayim basically means all live animals. So we're all living things. So basically, that's a general term. So now what he's going to say is, and you can look at the chart, and I put the braita on one side and the explanation of the braita of Rava on the other side. And Rava's going to say, obviously, the Tana was adding the word chayim into the picture. Uklal uprat uklal ka'amrale. And then we resolve all that issue of this doesn't match the kind of drasha that we're using. Because once you put into a klal uprat uklal structure, you're now going to have, oh, well, now it's going to include anything that's similar to the prat. And now we're going to read the whole braita according to this. But like I said, not only are we changing that, but we're going to change what we thought was a question is going to be an answer. What we thought was an answer is going to be a question, and it's going to come out differently. We're going to actually break the sections in different places than we did earlier. Okay, so now we're going to have to read the whole thing again. And before we get there, though, we have to deal with some side issue, okay, which is, how can you say that gneva, which is stolen item, shiur, which is specific, and chayim is a klal prat klal? Because chayim is not any stolen item. Gneva is any stolen item, which is general. Chayim is specific because it's animals. So, v'halo dame klala bratra la klala kamma. But that last klal is not like the first klal. In other words, this is not a regular klal, prat klal. We had before, let's say, al kol gnevan, al kol aveda. That was any theft, any lost item. That was general and general. This is general and somewhat general, but not exactly general. So, yeah, they say, don't worry about that. And this is a similar answer we're going to bring to a question we're going to have later in today's talk. Hatani debei Rabbi Yishmael. This goes by the Tan of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael had no problem doing klal prat, even if the klal is more general. It's much more general than shor, se, and chamor. It's just not as general as geneva. Okay, that issue doesn't bother us. And now they're going to say something that's not going to really make so much sense to you yet, but they're going to tell you that hachi kakashile. In really, okay, some people explain this means at the end of the braita, this is really their question. And I told you that in the beginning, you might not remember this, but Rava in the end is going to end with a question. Okay, Rava is going to basically say the braita ends with a question. Okay, and hachi kakashile, and this is really the question, and it's not just the question at the end though. It's a question that didn't say so in the braita, but he's going to add it in to every section where there's a difficulty in this braita, because the braita is the back and forth, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Every part of the question is really going to be asking, even though these words don't appear at all in the original braita, im himatzei timatzei lamali. What do the words, we didn't even think we were darshaning those words. What do the words himatzei, timatzei, what are they doing there? And what can we darshan from them? So now we don't really understand what this means yet, but now we're going to read it inside. We're going to go through all the parts of the braita according to Rava. So again, the first question is, it should have just said shor, geneva, and chayim, klal, prat, klal, and you would have included everything. And then I'm going to just add, in which case, what is himatzei, timatzei doing there in the pasuk? That's really what the question is. So here comes the answer, okay, which is what? Yomal shor gneva v'chayim v'akol b'chlal, right? That's the question. You could have said that, everything would have been in, and then you don't need himatzei, timatzei. What's it coming from? To which they answer, ilu ken ayiti omeo, no, if you had general, specific shor and chayim at the end, you would have said, ma prat meforash davar karev l'gabei mizbech, av kol hakarev l'gabei mizbech. So you would have said, no, that only includes, okay, now this is where the question ends, the answer ends. Okay, in the other part, that was just half the answer, and the answer continued. In this version, this is where the answer ends. And the answer is basically, no, you need himatzei timatzei, because the klal pratu klal would only have included things similar to shor, things on the altar. Now, some of this is going to resonate as familiar because we're just explaining the words in the braita, but the way he's using it here are very different. So right now, he's just going to say you would have had shor, only things similar to shor if you had a klal pratu klal with just shor. What is himatzei timatzei coming for then? To say everything, right? Anything that is metaltalin and has inherent value. So then they're going to say, but wait, if that's the case, then you don't need se at all, because you have the shor, which includes things like shor, but that's all becomes irrelevant because himatzei timatzei overrides that and includes everything. So mayesh lavi se, in other words, se would have been included from shor also. So, well, then you don't need himatzei timatzei because se itself is unnecessary. Forget you. Let's say you didn't have himatzei timatzei. You would have had shor. Shor includes all animals on the altar. Se would then come and include more than that. So basically, back to our question. If se would have included more than that, what would it include? Gufo metaltel, right? Davar metaltel v'gufo mamon, which would then mean we don't need himatzei timatzei at all. Well, no. Answer, Yomar Geneva v'shor v'seh v'chayim v'akol b'chlal. Sorry, that's part of the question. So you could have said that everything would have been included. What do you need himatzei timatzei? That now we get to the answer. No, that wouldn't have worked because you would still only have things that are similar to shor and seh. Shor would have taught you karev l'gamei mizbech. Seh would have taught you something that the Bechor is sanctified. That's why you need himatzei timatzei to add more. To which the Gemara is going to say, okay, so what else would that be including? Seh would be to teach you things similar to seh, which would mean firstborn sanctified, even though you can't bring it on the altar. What would that include? Chamor, right? So here comes the question. Ma yesh lecha lahavi chamor? But kishu omer chamor, hare chamor amor. Well, then you didn't need the word chamor to appear in the pasuk. In which case, right? So gneva is now including everything. which means Yomar, again, gneva, every time we say gneva, we mean gneva and chayim at the end, right? We have the klal, prat, klal. So now we have klal. We have a bunch of pratim, shor, seh, chamor. Chamor can't be including anyone whose firstborn is sanctified because that's already learned from seh. And therefore, what am I getting from gneva? The klal, pratu, klal, and the himatzei, timatzei, okay? Because you have to add that. The rabot called, I'm sorry. Gneva, the rabot called davar, sorry, my mistake. In which case you don't need himatzei, timatzei, which is back to square one. Why do you need himatzei, timatzei? What is himatzei, timatzei doing for us? Okay, because just the klal, pratu, klal, since chamor was unnecessary for itself, it must be coming to teach everything, in which case we have no need for the words himatzei, timatzei. To which they again say, no. Yomar gneva v'shor v'seh v'chamor v'chayim v'akol b'chlal. Right? Oh, sorry. This is still, I'm sorry, I keep breaking at the wrong spot. So therefore, here comes the question. It could have just said gneva, shor, seh, chamor, chayim, meaning the klal with the pratim and the klal at the end. We would have known to include everything because chamor must be coming to do something additional, in which case we have no need for the words himatzei, timatzei. Back to square one. Answer. If that were the case, I would say, still, maha prat mefurash, what is chamor going to add to say? Only animals, right? It'll include any animals who don't have, right, firstborns, okay? Their firstborn isn't sanctified. So, but it would just be animals. And that's why you need himatzei, timatzei. So let's read that inside. Ma yesh lahavi shar ba'alei chayim. That would only include all animals. Kishu omer chayim harei chayim amor. But now we're going to say the word chayim is unnecessary, right? So ma'ani makayem gneva lerabot kol davar im himatzei timatzei lamali. And here's the end of the braita. Finally, they're basically going to say, no. In other words, they tried to say you would have only known animals, and that's why you need himatzei timatzei. Comes the braita at the end and says, but wait, no, because the word chayim means animals, but we already learned animals from chamor, which means the word chayim must be including something additional, which leaves us, this last line, which we thought was the answer. It's the last time we said, oh, the whole point of chayim is it's something additional, and that teaches us everything. Now, according to this reading of the braita, that leaves us with a question, because again, the whole premise of the braita, according to Rava, is asking, what are the words himatzei, timatzei doing? And in the end, we're left with the question, what are the words himatzei, timatzei doing? Because if you start with gneva, and then you add shor, and you add seh, and you add chamor, you already get to all animals. So the word chayim at the end must be including something additional. What could it be possibly be coming to include? If not, davar mitzatov v'gufo mamon, which we thought answered the question. No, this raises the question because then it goes back to im himatzei timatzei lamali. So what are those words doing in the beginning of the pasuk? Again, because it's a double language, they think it must be coming to include something. So with that, the braita leaves us with a question. So turning now to Amud Bet. This was a whole different reading of the braita, which really started off with a klal, pratu, klal instead of a klal and prat, and basically suggesting that we had gneva, we had chayim, and then we have these other words in the middle. They all include other things on their own. The word chayim at the end must be coming to include anything else, because it can't be coming to include animals because that was already included, which basically means, what are the words himatzei, timatzei doing? In which case we don't really have an answer. So, ihachi, shapir kashile. So the Gemara says, yeah, well then, if you're going to read the braita that way, it's a good question. What is the answer to this question? To which they answer, mishum di le pircha, because you really could knock out what we just did. How so? You could say, lerabot kol davar mehecha kamaitela miklala batra. So now they're going to say, just one second, just want to make sure I have the line right. Okay, here's our difficulty. Our difficulty is, in the end, this is all learned out really from the word chayim, right? But the problem is that the word chayim, what does it really mean? It means animals, right? So it's a little bit weird to be deriving it all from the word animals. Klal gufe chayim k'tiveba. Klal pratu klal mai kamahanile. If the whole thing is really learned out from the words chayim, then what is this klal upratu klal coming to teach you? Ila tuye kol davar hachayim k'tiv ba'alei chayim in midiachrini la. In the end, this really doesn't work. because the whole thing is derived from this word that's a klal, that's chayim. That was at the end, the last word that made all the difference. But that word in and of itself means animals. So how could you possibly suggest that that word is going to include all animals? And therefore, mishum hachi itzrich im himatzei timatzei. In the end, they're going to say, forget thinking that the klal prat klal is gneva, starting with gneva, ending with chayim. It doesn't make sense. Okay, forget that we tried to say, well, Tan Debei Rabbi Yishmael is not bothered that they're different. Even if they're different and you could make a klal prat, still, a klal prat klal, still you're using a word that really only means animals. There's no way we could get from a word that really only means live beings to include everything else. So basically, because of that, they're going to say it's actually based on a klal prat klal. And what's the klal and klal? Himatzei, timatzei. Okay, now there's a big problem with this. What's the big problem? When you do a klal prat klal, it's klal, prat, and then klal. Well, what we want to say right now is himatzei, timatzei. The first words in the pasuk is the klal who starts it and the klal that ends it. To which the Gemara is going to ask, this is a klal, and then pratim. This is not a klal, prat, klal. Usually a klal, prat, klal has to do with the order of the pasuk. It starts off with a general word, it goes to specific words, and then it goes to a general word. How can you possibly say it's a klal, prat, klal when himatzei and timatzei are right next to each other and not surrounding those words? To which Amar Ravina, Kida Amre b'Ma'arava. This is like we answered before. Oh, well, Tan Debei Yishmael has a different approach. Well, now they say in Israel they had a different approach, and this must match their approach. Anytime you have two general words right next to each other, now himatzei, timatzei are very general words. If you find the stolen item, right, you find it, and it's a double language of finding it. Finding could be anything you find. Hatil prat benehem v'dunam b'klalu prat. View the pasuk as if, right, like cut and paste. It's as if the pratim were in between the two words. Okay, and that's a unique approach, but that must be the approach of this Tana Debei Chizkiya. Okay, so shtei shor bein himatzei l'timatzei latu yemai. So now let's go. Put shor in the middle of. Now we have to start from the beginning. Himatzei and timatzei are the klal. Shor is the prat. What is that coming to include? Again, remember how it works. The prat, when you have a klal prat to klal, you only include things that are similar to the prat. So if you want to say the shor comes to include animals that you already get from chayim. Well, this is how it's going to work. Shor must be coming to teach you everything because it can't come to teach you animals because animals already appears in the pasuk in the word chayim. So it must be coming to teach you something else, and here's going to be our answer. So what else could shor be teaching you? Anything that's movable and anything that has inherent value. Okay, that sounds good. But what's the problem? The problem is shor is not the only word in the pasuk. Once we do that and say that since the word chayim appears and then the word shor, it must be, obviously it doesn't matter the order, then, right, because I'm going out of order, chayim is after shor, but it doesn't matter. Once the word, we view himatzei, timatzei as if it's the klal and all the other pratim are in between. So chayim would teach you animals, shor would teach you everything else that we're looking for. Well, then what is chamor needed for and what is se needed for? So chamor, we're going to have a good answer. So what's that coming to include? Well, certainly not coming to include something that's not a live animal because we already learned that from shor. So what could it possibly do? Well, there's another halacha we learned yesterday. Remember, you only pay kefel if it's a distinct item. We had different interpretations of what that means, but you could say chamor is coming to exclude that. What's the problem, though? Well, then what's the word se doing in the pasuk? To which the answer, basically, we have no answer. So, as I warned you in the beginning of class, this is now going to reject the way we understood this whole drasha. We understood the whole thing was all based on the klal upratu klal. But based on that, shor includes anything, right, that moves, that's movable and has inherent value. Chamor tells us not if it's not the davar mesuyam, only a davar mesuyam. Se doesn't teach us anything. So if you're going to go with this drasha, you have to have an explanation for every word. And that's just not going to work here. Therefore, they forget the klal upratu klal, and they go to the riboi miut riboi. Okay? And that's what I told you from the beginning. Ela riba umiut v'ribahu. If you notice, the words klal upratu klal did not appear at all in the Tana de Chizkiya. So that's why we can allow for all different interpretations. They were clearly employing some sort of methodology, but they didn't say what the wording was. So now they're going to say the Tana de Chizkiya was really doing a riboi, miut, and riboi. Okay. How does this work, right? Now, Tana de Rabbi Ishmael, I told you we go back and say this goes like Rabbi Ishmael also. Tana de Rabbi Ishmael, b'mayim shtei pa'amim, ein ze klal prat, ela riba umi'et v'riba, riba hakol. Okay, this is by fish. I'm not going to get into the details here, the kashrus of fish, but the word b'mayim appears twice, even though it talks about nichalim and things like that. They learn from there that it basically includes everything. And basically what they're going to say is, in this case, right, so my Rabbe kol mile. Okay, we're basically going to say, in our situation, it's the same thing. Im himatzei timatzei is basically going to include everything. And then it's like we did yesterday with the kol. The word kol just includes everything. You don't even need the details, which obviously is going to beg the question. Then what are all the details doing there? It basically could have read, okay, and this is the way we're going to read the pasuk. Im himatzei timatzei biyado agneva, shnai mishalem. If we find any item, himatzei, timatzei, any item, double language, just like mayim taught you everything, even though there were details in that pasuk. Likewise here, there might be some details. Himatzei, timatzei is a general term that includes everything. And from there, we learn again, what was this whole thing? We wanted to know how you know this kefel by everything. If you don't think the pasuk Vav is talking about kefel, because you think it's a kefel for a regular ganav, because you think it's to'in tanak ganav, the first braita we saw yesterday, where you're going to learn kefel from, and now we have our answer. But finally, the words im, right? And they're basically explaining the Tana de Chizkiya like this. Im himatzei timatzei is a riboi. Okay, so now ihaki kol hane prate lavali. So then, what do you need all these other pratim for? Shor, chamol, se, chayim. What are we going to do with all those words? Okay, let's go. Chad miute karka. We've seen this before. Remember, one is to say animals, right? Shore and not land. Two. Chad miute avadim, chamor, and not slaves. Chad miute se, miute shtarot, not documents, because documents don't have inherent value. Geneva v'chayim, what do we do with those words? Something else entirely that we're going to deal with tomorrow. They're going to go back to a gufa and say, oh, let's understand what Rav said, so we don't have to deal with it today much. What do you do with the words geneva and chayim? Da'amar achye lekeren ke'en sheganav. Okay, the words chayim and geneva he puts together, even though they're not near each other in the pasuk, and says what it means is when you steal an item, and let's say it gets lost or destroyed or whatever might happen to it, and you don't have the actual item, and you now have to pay the value back to the person you took it from, and the price changed in value. Ha-chayeh, they use the word chayim to say ha-chayeh, which means revive. Revive the principle as it was from the beginning. Okay, we're going to have to understand in what case, and is this all cases, and that's tomorrow's stuff. But what it means is when you go to pay the value of the stolen item, if the price fluctuated, okay, or if the item went up or down in value, we'll see exactly what it means. We use the original value at the moment it was stolen. That's how you pay the principal of a stolen item if you don't have the actual item to return. So that's what Rav does with those two words, something totally not connected to what we're talking about. I mean, it has to do with theft and paying back, but not what we were discussing. But he says that's what that's talking about. Okay, we finished that complicated sugya. Okay, that was quite complicated because we had a braita that wasn't so clear what it meant. We had a major problem with the whole premise of it. Rava had to change it entirely, basically, and say it's not shor and gneva, it's actually shor, gneva, and chayim, and it's a klal, prat, klal, to which ultimately we said it can't actually be a klal, prat, klal, it wouldn't work. And in the end, we changed it to a riboi, miut, riboi. And then we have to explain what's the purpose if himatzei, timatzei really includes everything, then what's the purpose of all those other words? And those words, each one is to exclude something or to teach some halacha. Now we're going back to the ping pong between the two braitot that we saw yesterday, and I brought on the sheet on the second side the chart that we had yesterday, and I just extended it. So I kept the chart and the ping pong back and forth, and now we're back to the ping pong because where did we end? We said that im himatzei timatzei teaches you kefel for the one who doesn't have pasuk vav to teach him kefel. So now the Gemara is going to have to say, what does the other person do with, right, the other braita do with im himatzei timatzei? Ulaman damar cha b'ganav v'cha b'toin tanak ganav. You already learned ganav kefel from pasuk vav. So b'ganav atzmo nafgalemi im himatzei ganav pasuk vav. We get a regular thief. So, hi im himatzei timatzei my darshebe. You don't need himatzei timatzei to teach you this kefel by anything that's movable and has inherent value. So, what are you going to do with the words himatzei timatzei? They're actually going to learn something entirely different, which will get us off on a new ping pong. Where does the other guy learn this from? Back and forth. He needs it for the following statement that Rava bar Ilai said, which is, I'm a Rava bar Ilai. My time of derive, damal, modeh b'knas, v'achar kach ba'u edim patur. Where does Rav get this? That if I go to court and I admit that I stole your item, I don't have to pay kefil. You remember, modeh b'knas is exempt. So first we'll see where we get that basic halacha from, but this is a more complicated halacha. This is, if I go to court and I admit that I stole it, I don't have to pay kefil. But what if a minute later, witnesses came in, or 3 days later, witnesses came in, and now there's proof by witnesses that I stole? Do I have to pay kefil? So Rav says, modeh b'knas v'achar kach ba'u edim patur. I don't have to pay kefil. If I came first and admitted, I'm exempt from that penalty. Because remember, kefil is a penalty. I'm exempt from it. As soon as I admit something, I am exempt. It doesn't matter if witnesses came later. Dictive, how do we get it? Im himatzei timatzei. How do we get it from those words? Well, because remember, that's in the pasuk about paying kefil. So it's saying, you're only going to pay kefil im himatzei timatzei, meaning, im himatzei be'edim, timatzei be'dayanim. This is how they darshan it. If you were found out, caught by witnesses, and not that you admitted it yourself, then timatzei be'edim, then you'll have be'dayanim. Then you'll have to do what the dayanim say, which is the kefil. The kefil is basically instituted by the court. So prat l'marshiat atzmo, but if you turn yourself in, you won't have to, even if the witnesses came right after you. Now, this obviously raises a bit of a question. What if I know that witnesses are going and I run to the court and I try to get there before them and I admit it in court? I can get away with this. And that's why we're going to see, when we do the ping pong back, we're going to see the other opinion doesn't hold by this. Okay, and that's how we're going to kind of end the ping pong to a certain extent, because we're going to say, oh, he just doesn't hold by this. He actually thinks you do have to pay if witnesses came. But anyway, so there's a machloket about this. If you say both are to'en tanakana, back to ping-ponging back to the other person, and so if you hold himatzei timatzei is coming to teach about the ganav and the kefil, like we just did, we spent our whole class on that. Where are you going to learn this idea of if you turn yourself in? Well, he does think that if you turn yourself in and there's no witnesses, you're going to be exempt from kefil. Where does he learn that from? This is in pasuk chet. It says, right, Asher Yomar ki uzeh, ad Elohim yavod var shnehem. They'll go to court, right, if there's this disagreement and I claim it was stolen and you claim, where is it, my item? So Asher yashiun Elohim mishalem shnayim l're'eh. If I lie falsely, right, I'll have to. Now, Yashiun Elohim, Elohim here doesn't mean God. Yashiun Elohim means the court. Okay, a bunch of places in the Torah, Elohim means court. That means v'lo marshiat atzmo. You pay kefel when the court convicts you and not when you admit it yourself. So what does the other guy do with Asher Shiur Elohim? Sounds like it's a good drasha to say modeh b'knas patur, right? We go back to the other guy, the second braita. He has two things. One, it teaches you Asher Shiur Elohim means if I admit it in court, I'm exempt from the kefil. The other pasuk, himatzei timatzei, comes to teach you if I admit it in court and then witnesses come, I'm also exempt. That's a new thing. Those are two different things. Now, obviously, if I admit it in court and witnesses come and I have to pay kefil, then I don't have to pay kefil. Obviously, if I just admitted and witnesses didn't come, you could have learned one from the other. But the point is, if we only have one pasuk, you would have assumed it's just coming to teach you a general case of modeh b'knas. I came and admitted that I owe something and there's a penalty associated with it, I won't have to pay it. But perhaps without a second pasuk, you would have thought, but if witnesses came after me, maybe they would make me pay it. So this braita has to say you need two psukim, one to teach you the basic law and one to teach you the extension of the law, which is not only in a regular case where I admit, but even if witnesses came after, I'm still exempt. And as I told you before, we're going to end the ping pong here because Lemanda Amar Cha b'ganav v'cha b'to'en. Umanda Amar travayu b'to'en tanakanav kasavar modeh b'knas v'achar kach ba'u edim chayav. Okay, and basically, he's not going to need both psukim. He doesn't have both psukim free. So what's he going to do? Oh, he just doesn't learn the second thing because he doesn't think that you're actually exempt. He thinks you're actually liable if witnesses come after. Okay. Even though I said we're going to end the ping pong, we still have one more question on the ping pong, which is, If you say you're going to learn ganav from pasuk vav, bishlama im himatzei timatzei l'chadrava bar hilai. So you explained, according to you, why it says himatzei timatzei. That we got. Remember, himatzei timatzei was to teach you this halacha of modeh b'knas and after witnesses came, which the other guy doesn't hold by. Okay, so we now resolved all that. But there's one last thing to figure out for this opinion, which is avakol hane prate lamali. But what do you need? Shor, chamor, se in that pasuk and chayim. All those words are totally unnecessary. To which they say, yeah, that doesn't bother us. Again, going back to Rabbi Yishmael, ki detana debei Rabbi Yishmael, detana debei Rabbi Yishmael, kol parasha shenemra v'nishnet, lo nishnet ela ledavar shenitchadesh. We're adding an additional thing here. What are we adding here according to this opinion? That if you're modeh b'knas, right, and witnesses came, you're still exempt from the kefel. That's what it's telling us. So you're only going to pay kefel if the court convicted you. And then it just repeats. Again, which thing? Sure, fine. It doesn't matter. In other words, when they want to give you a new law, sometimes they repeat things that aren't really necessary. And after we spent the whole day darshaning every single word, this is a different approach saying not every word needs to be darshaned, basically. Okay, done with that section. We have one last thing to deal with for today. So that was all the ping pong back and forth. We have one last question that reminds us of something we saw yesterday. Maybe a ganav has to take an oath. And only if the ganav took an oath saying, I didn't steal it, only then they would be required to pay the kefel. Why is that not the case? Why do I have to pay kefel anytime I stole, even if I didn't deny it in court with an oath? Right? Because why would they think it? Because it comes from toin tanak ganav, where only with an oath do I have to pay the kefel. So, lo sakadatach. It doesn't seem like it's with a shvua. Ditanya, as it says in the following braita, Rabbi Yaakov omer shnai mishalem, shelo b'shvua. You pay double, that's without an oath. What do you mean? Maybe it is with an oath. This is the classic style, right? How do you know? Amarta lo kachaya. This is a very weird braita. It says because it's not the case. Okay, that's not very helpful, right? It's an answer that didn't really answer the question. So they say the following: My lo kachaya. Amar Abaye. What does that mean? Well, Abaye explains. Lo lichtav rachman shnayim mishalem beganav alete bekavachomer mitoyin tanakanav. You didn't even need to write kefel. You could have learned it from a kavachomer with toin tanakanav. If toin tanakanav has to be kefel, obviously, right? Someone who stole it does. Why? Because ma toin tanakanav de behetera ataliyade. If you gave me your item to watch, it actually got into my possession, but I had permission to have your item in my house. So it's a much less, it's less severe theft than a regular case. And yet, Amar Kral Lishalim Trey, and the pasuk said you have to pay double. So ganav atzmo to be surah atiliyade lo koshakein. So obviously, a ganav who went into somebody's house and took an item out of their house, of course they'll have to pay kefel. So you didn't even need to write the pasuk. So why is there a pasuk by kefel? It must be alashnayim mishalem dekatav rachmana beganav atzmo. The fact that it says it specifically about a regular ganav, the afilu shelo b'shvua. It must be adding something additional, because if we learned it from toin tanak ganav, remember, it would be learned, we would learn only if you took an oath. So therefore, it has to say, and in a Gneva case, to say Gneva is different. Even without an oath, you're going to have to pay the kefel. And with that, we finish today's daf. And as I summarized along the way, so I'm not going to summarize at the end here, wishing everyone a great day and happy celebration of our 4 years of learning, and wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, maybe a peaceful Shabbat, and Refuah Shalema to all those who are injured, and Zichronam Levarcha to all those who were killed. Shabbat Shalom.